Welcome students, welcome to the lecture number 3 of chapter 2, that is Python programming fundamentals. Okay, so in the previous lecture we have discussed about the data types. Okay, that data types basically defines the type of value that can be stored in the variable, and as well as the different types of operation that are supported by that variable. Okay, so we have learned about the data types in the previous lecture, and we came to know that there are various data types like numeric. Okay, one is numeric with us, and dictionary, boolean, sets, and sequence type. Okay, and I told you that set is not in our syllabus, so we will not do that, but the rest of the data types is in our syllabus, so we we do all the rest of the data types. Okay, so as you all know that data types specifies the type of data that is supported by the language, and that data can be stored in a variable of Python language, as well as data type decides the type of operations that can be performed on that data. Okay, so let's begin with the first one, that is numeric. You see that this one is the numeric one, so we begin with this type of data. So the first data type that we are going to discuss is basically the numeric. Okay, so the for the numeric we have the following information, that in Python numeric data types represents the data which has numeric value. Obviously numeric data type is basically for representing the data which consists of numeric values. Okay, and we basically categorize those numeric values into three categories, and the numeric values can be integer, floating point, and the complex number. Okay, so the numeric data in Python is basically divided into three categories. One is basically the integer, second one is the floating point number, and third one is the complex number. Okay, so for indicating these types of data like integer data, floating point data, complex data, there are some class in Python. Okay, so for representing the integer data we have int option, for representing the floating point data that we have float option, and for the complex number we have complex option with us. Okay, so how we are going to use these options for representing these type of data, we will do in the later on in the questions, but you just have to understand this thing, that numeric values are categorized into three categories: integer, floating point numbers, and int. And whenever we want to represent integer values in our program, we basically use this word int, and when we want to represent the floating point numbers in our program, then we use float, and to represent the complex number in our program we use this complex. So these are nothing else but the classes. Now what are the classes, that we will discuss it in later on, that what are the classes, but right till now you have to remember this thing, that for representing integer you have to use int, floating point numbers float, and complex number you have to use complex word. Okay, now integers, basically integers are, this value is represented by int class. Obviously I told you that for representing the integer value you have to use int, and what is basically int? It is nothing else but a class. Okay, so till now you have to just remember this thing, that for representing the integer values we use basically int, and what is int? Int is just a class. And what is a basically class? We will discuss it later on. So just remember this thing, that int is a class. Okay, all right, and it contains positive or negative whole numbers. So when we use int, so it means that we are allowed to store positive numbers as well as negative numbers also, but without fraction or decimal. So it means we cannot write data like 2 by 5, 3 by 5, or in 23.45. no, without fraction and without decimal numbers are allowed in integers category. ठीक है, they may be either positive integer or a negative integer, but not in the form of fraction or a decimal number. Okay, so in Python there is no limit how long an integer value can be. So it is a plus point in Python that there is no limit for the value of integer. Okay, suppose if we see the example of some other languages, that now we are learning about the Python language, but there are other languages also like C language, C++, Java. So in these languages there is some restriction on the integer value. So it means in the C, so if we consider the example of C language, so if we use int in C language, then we can store data up to maximum 32,000 value in it. Okay, but there is no limit on the data in case of Python if we use integers. Okay, next one is the float. So this value is represented by float class. Okay, so for representing the floating point number, a float class is used. It is basically a real number with floating point representation, and it is specified by the decimal point. Okay, so it means whenever you want to represent the data with decimal, then go for the float class. Okay, and the last one is basically a complex number. So very soon you are going to learn about the complex number in your 11th standard or maybe in 12th standard. So complex number is also a type of number. Okay, so Python provides us a facility that we can also deal with the complex number also. Okay, so complex number is represented by complex class, as integers are represented by int class, float is represented by float class. So similarly complex number is represented by complex class, and the pattern for the complex number is that first you have to write the real part, then the imaginary part, and then you have to put J symbol. Okay, so when you are going to learn about the complex numbers, then you are definitely going to understand that what is basically the real part or what is the imaginary part in a complex number. Okay, so till now we have learned that the first type is basically numeric type, and under numeric type we have integers, float and complex number. For representing the integers value we have int class with us, and int class support both positive and negative numbers but didn't support the fractional and decimal numbers, and there is no limit that how long integer value you are going to store in the variable. Okay, there is one more class, that is float. So float value is represented by float class, and in this you can store the real numbers with floating point representation, that is with the decimal points also. Okay, and there is one more, that is complex number, and for that complex class is there. Okay, so these are the three categories which is available inside the numeric data type, right? Now after learning about these things, let's come again to the topic, that is variable. As we all know that variables, we have already discussed with that variable is basically a type of an identifier which is used to store the value that user can use in the program. Okay, so why we use a variable? Because for storing the value. And what is the purpose of storing the value in the variable? So that we can use those variables in our program. Okay, and also we can change its value whenever required in our program, right? So we know that what is basically a variable, we have already discussed it. But now today I am going to explain you about three major components associated with the variable. Okay, so there are three important things that are associated with the variables, and what are those things? The first one is a value, the second one is basically an identity, and the third one is basically a type. Okay, so with every variable three types of things are associated. One is the value, second one is the identity, and third one is the type. Okay, so let us see that what are the three different components of the variables. So the first component that we have seen is basically a value. So what is a value? Value refers to the data that may be either a number or a string or a floating point number that is stored in a variable. Okay, so it means when we write a is equal to 5, okay, so this a is basically a variable. Okay, this a is basically a variable, right? So what is represented by the 5 over here? So 5 is basically the value, okay, 5 is basically the value that is referred to the variable a. Okay, so I hope that you understand that what is represented by value. So value basically refers to the data that is stored in the variable, right? Now the next thing is basically an identity. What is basically mean by identity? So identity refers to the address of the variable in the memory, and the address of the variable is obtained by id command, right? So let me clarify you that what is basically this identity means. Okay, suppose we have written the statement like a is equal to 5. Okay, so when we write like this, then what will happen? This 5 value gets stored in the memory of the computer. Okay, this 5 value gets stored in the memory of the computer, and obviously if a particular area is reserved in the memory for storing the value 5, so this area must have some address with it. Suppose the address of this area will be 145, suppose 3692. Suppose this is basically the address of this area. Okay, so when we write a is equal to 5, so what happened? There is this 5 gets stored in the memory. Okay, and obviously whatever be the space reserved by for storing the 5 will have an address. Okay, and this a variable refers to this location. Okay, so this a is a variable, it refers to this location where the 5 is stored, and the address of this location is this. Okay, so what basically id option will basically tell us about the address in which that variable is present. Okay, the id variable tell us about the address at which the variable is right now present. So let us see this concept practically also. Let me open my Python IDE. Yes, now it's open, right? So we have written a is equal to 10, right? So if I write a, then I get the value that is associated with a, that is 10. But suppose if I write id of a, then what I will get? I will get a number that is 1555101,760. So what does it mean? That when I write this a is equal to 10, so a, this value 10 is stored in the memory at the location number this. Okay, so what happened when I write a is equal to 10? The value 10 is stored in the memory at a location number that is 1555101,760, and then a refers to that location. So when I write simply a, I will get the value. When I write id of a, I will get the address associated with the a, right? So the next thing is that is type. Okay, so type basically means, type refers to the type of value stored in the variable. So Python supports various data types, as we have already learned about the data types now, that Python we have different types of data, like numeric data we have integer, float, complex number in it. Under sequence we have sets, list, tuples and dictionary. These are the various data types we have seen. Okay, so let me see that what is basically the type. Type basically specify me the type of the value that is stored in the variable. Okay, so over here we have written this a is equal to 10. So what kind of information we are getting from this? When I write a, I get the value present in a, okay, the value that is referred by A, and when I write ID of A, then we get the address of the location where 10 is stored, and basically A refers to that location, okay. And suppose the last thing is basically the type, right? So if I write type of A, then what will I get? Class int, because you know that A stores 10 and 10 is basically a integer value, okay. So that's why when I write type A, so I want to know the data type of A, then it shows me that A is of integer type, and I told you that integer, in case of integer, an int class is used, so that's why it shows me the result as class int, okay. Let me take another example, that B is equal to 25.4, right? So when I write B, I get the value associated with B. When I get ID of B, I get the address of the location where the B refers, okay. And when I write the type of B, what I get? I get the data type of the value stored in B, that is class float, right? So I hope you understand that what is the three components associated with the variable. One is the value, second one is the ID, and third one is basically the type, okay. So I hope it is clear to you. Now let's move to the next thing, that is the operator, okay. So as you know that we are basically discussing about the tokens, okay, and under tokens we have studied about the keywords, and the second token we have studied about the identifier, and under identifier we are studying the variable, okay. And in order to understand about the type of the variable, that's why we have just go through the concept of data types also. So till now we have covered about the keywords, identifier, these two tokens. Now the third category of token that we are going to study now is basically operator. So operator is basically the third token, okay. So what is the purpose of operator? So the operator decides the type of operation that can be performed on that data. So what does it mean by this statement? Let me clear you with an example. Suppose I have written A is equal to 5, okay, and then I write B is equal to 7, okay. If I write A plus B, okay, in this case this A and B are basically, as it is an expression, so in this expression A and B are termed as operands, okay. We call A and B in this expression are acting as an operands, okay. And what is this plus represents? Plus is basically tells us about the type of operation that can be performed on these operator, okay. So plus tell me about the type of operation that is to be performed on these type of variable, okay. So plus is basically an operator which tell me the type of operation that can be performed on this operator, on this operand, sorry. So we can say that plus is basically an operator which tells me the type of operation that can be performed on these operands, okay. So the third token which we are going to study is basically operator. So we are going to study about these types of symbols in operator, okay. So operator decides, right, so operator decides the type of operation that can be performed on the data, okay. So whatever operator you have used, only the operation will be performed with respect to that operator only. If you use plus operator, then addition operation is performed. If you use minus operator, then subtraction operation is performed. So it means operator decides the type of operation that can be performed on the data, right. So the first category of operators are arithmetic operators, Then we have relational operators, logical operators, assignment operators, and membership operators. Okay, so basically these 5 categories of operators are available in Python, right? So the first category is basically arithmetic operator, and in arithmetic operator we have following types of operator. First one is the plus, that is basically for addition. Second one is minus, that is basically for subtraction. This star symbol is basically for multiplication. This slash symbol is basically for division, and double slash is basically for floor division, and percentage symbol represent the modulus operation, and double star basically represent the exponent operation. So let me explain you about these operations one by one. Okay, so as we have to understand about these some kinds of operation. Okay, so you can see that suppose I have taken a variable x is equal to 45 and y is equal to 20, right? So if I write x plus y, what I get the sum of these two numbers. Okay, all right, and suppose if I write x minus y, then obviously I get the subtraction of these numbers. If I write the next one is, okay, just wait. No, okay. So if I write x, for multiplication we have star with us, so x star y, when we press enter we get 900 with us. Okay, so these are basically the first 3 basic arithmetic operators with us, that is plus, minus and multiply, right? After that we have division operator with us. So before initiating that one, let us understand about this division and the floor division operation. What is basically the difference between these two operations? Okay, so we want to know the difference between the slash, single slash, that is division, and the double slash, that is floor division operator. Okay, so you can see that when we use this divide operator, remember one thing, whenever we use the divide operator we always get the result in decimal. Okay, we always get the result in decimal. So if we divide any integer value with another integer value, but in case of slash the answer is always in float. As you can see that when we divide 8 and 2, as 8 is an integer value and 2 is an integer value, when we divide these two values, 8 divided by 2, so obviously we get 4, but in spite of 4 you can see that we are getting the result as 4.0. Okay, when we divide 7 by 2, obviously when we divide 7 by 2 it is 3.5, that's why it is showing me 3.5. but in most of the languages when we divide integer by integer we get the answer in integer only. Okay, but in case of Python this divide operator always give the answer in decimal, whether your answer is coming in decimal or not. If the answer is not coming in decimal, then it automatically put decimal 0 at the end of that number, as you see in this case. Okay, suppose if we divide a float number with integer number, then also we get the answer in float. Suppose if we are written 7.0 divided by 2, then 3.5, and when we divide integer by float, then what will be the answer? Like 7 divided by 2.0, then in that case also we get the answer as 3.5. Okay, so the basic thing is that in case of this divide operator, whatever be the type of data which we are in which we are performing the division operation, the answer will always be in float, that answer will always be in decimal. Let me show you this thing. Okay, now suppose we have written 8 divide by 2, so obviously we should get the answer 4, but as we are using slash, that is division operator, then the answer will always in decimal. It doesn't matter whether you are using any integer value divide by integer, it doesn't matter, the answer is always in fraction. If I divide 8 divided by 3, then obviously the answer will be in fraction also. But if in case of divide operator, you have to remember this thing, if the answer is not coming in decimal, then it automatically put decimal 0 at the end of that number, as it is done in the case of 8 divided by 2. Okay. Now, what is basically the floor division operation? So double slash is represented by floor division operation. So what is basically the floor division operation? It basically gives the quotient by removing the decimal part. Okay. Over here it is also giving us the quotient, but it is not removing the decimal part, and if there is no decimal part in the quotient, then it automatically put the decimal 0.0 at the end of that number. Okay. But what the floor division will give, it gives you the quotient part by removing the decimal part. Okay. So what does it mean? Suppose we have divided an int with int. So in that case, we will always get the answer in int. Okay. So you have seen that when we perform 8 divided by 2, we get 4.0. But when we perform 8 floor division 2, then in spite of 4.0, what we are getting? We are getting 4. And you can see that in this case 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. But over here 7 floor division 2 is 3. Why? Because 7 is an int, 2 is an int. So obviously the answer will be in int if we using the floor division operator. Okay. But suppose I know that 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. And if I want to use floor division operation and I want that the result must be in decimal, then what I can do? If I write like int divide by float, then the answer will be in float. Like if we write 8.0 divide floor division 2, then we get the answer as 4.0. Similarly, if I want the answer in decimal, then 7.0 divided by 2. So by writing 7.0 in spite of 7, we are providing the fractional data. Okay. And suppose if we have written like this float divided by int, then obviously we get the answer in the same manner. Okay. Actually, I have just basically this pattern is represented by these expression, and this pattern is represented by this expression. Okay. So basically it's just interchanged. So let me show you this practically also. Okay. So you can see that if I write 8 just wait. So if I write 8 floor division 2, then in spite of 4.0 I am getting 4, because if I have used this 8 divided by 2 also, but 8 floor division 2 will give me the answer as 4, whereas in this case the answer is always in decimal. Okay. And if I want the answer in, suppose if I have written like this 8 floor division 3, actually 8 is also an integer number, 3 is also an integer number, then you can see that in spite of giving us in the data in decimal, it is giving me the data in just integer. So it basically removes the decimal part data and gives me the data without the decimal part. But suppose I know that when 8 is divided by 3, we get the answer in decimal, and we want the answer in decimal, then what we have to do? We will write 8.0 floor division 3. In that case, we will get the answer as 2.0. Now, why we are getting the answer 2.0 in spite of 2.666? Let me explain you why is this. Actually, what it will do when 8 divided by 3, okay, so as 8.0 is a float, right, and 3 is basically an integer, so when a float divided by integer, we get the answer in float. So obviously the answer is 2.666 this. But what happened in the case of this float division? It simply removes the data after the decimal point. It simply ignores the data after the decimal point and put 0 in spite of the data which is after the decimal point. Okay, so this is basically the difference that you have to understand. Okay, so just remember one thing, that if you want the data, that if you want your answer should be in decimal, then always go for single slash, because single slash will give you the answer accurately. Okay, but when you want that your answer should be in integer, not in decimal, that you don't want to go further in decimal calculation, then always use double slash for it. Okay, so these are the basically division operator and the floor division operator with us, and there is one percentage operator with us. What result is given by this percentage operator? This operator is used to give the remainder when a number is divided by its divisor. So suppose if we divide 7 by 2, okay, so you know that 3 2s is basically 6, so it get divided by 3, and after the calculation we get the remainder as 1. Okay, and if we don't want to go in decimal, because in percentage operator the calculation will not go in decimal, so it will stop here because it can't be divided further by 2. So this one is basically the remainder, and this one, this 3, is basically the quotient. So if you want the quotient, then we have a divide operator and floor division operator with us. Okay, but suppose if we want this remainder, then we have an operator that is percentage with us. Okay, so for getting the quotient, these operators can be used, but for getting the remainder, this operator is basically used. Okay, so you can see that if I write 4 percentage 2, so obviously when 4 is divided by 2, the remainder is 0, but when a 7 is divided by 2, as you see over here, the remainder is 1. So let me also show you practically this thing. Okay, so when 4 mod 4 mod 2, we are getting the answer as 0, but 7 mod 2, we are getting the answer as 1. Okay, and the last operator, mathematical operator that is left, is double star, and I told you double star is basically for exponent. Suppose if we want to find the answer of 3 raised to power 4, okay, we want to find the answer of 3 raised to power 4, then what will we do? We will write 3 double star 4. So it will give me the answer of 3 raised to power 4. You can see that we are getting the answer as 81. Okay, so basically double star is used for finding the answer of powers. Okay, so 3 raised to power 4 is basically 81. So if we want to do that, we can write the expression in this manner. Okay, so in the today lecture we covered about the arithmetic operators, right? So in the next lecture we will see some other kind of operators and the tokens which are left. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you very much and have a nice day.